Hey, everybody. This is Reagan Knope and Ben Bowman. Welcome back to the Oregon Bridge.
I got the inside look of politics from the House Republican office. You know, if you're on the policy side of things, you really need to be in that building. It moves, and constituent services, not that they don't move, but it's got a different pace to it. And I actually think that it was the immersion into the constituent work that took place during COVID. At the end of the day, we've invested ourselves in our community. And I love the community I live in, and I like helping resolve issues.
Well, Ben, today we had State Representative Raquel Moore-Green as our guest. I'm going to read a little bit about her. So Raquel and her husband, James, they've been married for 35 years. They've got 3 kids, 13 grandchildren. They live in South Salem. She has served her community for a couple of decades. She's been an active member of the chamber, worked with the Economic Development SEDCOR in the Salem area, Salem City Club. She's been a local PCP. So Raquel has a pretty big resume. She's also a small business owner. We learned she worked for Representative Kevin Cameron, Commissioner Kevin Cameron, Senator Jackie Winters. And then in 2019, when Senator Winters passed away, Denise Bowles was in the House. She got appointed to the Senate, and Raquel was appointed to the House of Representatives. And then she won her election in 2020. Redistricting happens, and she decides to run for the Senate against Deb Patterson for a full term in that same seat, Senate District 10.
And what we should note about this for listeners just here at the outset, it's sort of implied in our conversation, but this is, or maybe I do say it, this is probably the most or one of the most competitive legislative seats in the state. Like, I think it's almost, I'm guessing they've one or both of them have cracked 6 or 7 figures, Reagan, in terms of fundraising. I bet Representative Moore-Green has raised over $1 million. When all is said and done, I'm almost certain that over $1 million will be spent on both sides, highly competitive. So yeah, that's the context. This is like a very, very competitive and expensive state legislative race this cycle.
Exactly. Good coverage of that, Ben. I would have to say one of the most interesting things for me with Raquel, and we kind of get into it at the front end of the episode, is like she was a campaign manager, a political consultant, a legislative staffer. Like, she's had all the jobs that I've had, that Ben's had. And so it's super interesting to see, because Ben, I kind of think of Raquel being she's in the public service part. You are kind of in that middle stage where you're transitioning from being staff to being a candidate. And I'm still hanging out here, hunkered down on the staff side.
You're
happy as a clam.
A lowly staffer who is paid 4 times as much as the representative is. Yes. So interestingly, Reagan, and perhaps unsurprisingly, you found the first half more interesting. I found the second half more interesting. So if you're a policy wonk, or you're interested in like behavioral health and addiction issues, which I really am, that's what we focus in on the second half. This is something the representative has worked on in Salem, clearly is studying. And she spoke at the CCO conference that I went to a couple weeks ago about this. So we talk about Measure 110. We talk about homelessness. We talk about how that's showing up with her constituents when she's campaigning. So yeah, I found that really interesting, and I appreciated her perspective. And I do think, I would guess actually whoever wins this seat, like the senator from this district, will be one of the leaders on this issue, because I think Deb Patterson works on these kinds of issues as well. So yeah, I enjoyed the conversation, and I hope it's useful and valuable for listeners too, particularly those who are trying to figure out, like, what are we actually going to, we've been campaigning on all these things, and like mostly what you're hearing about behavioral health and homelessness and housing is like some version of a soundbite about what we need to do. But as we talk about in this episode, every single crisis we're facing will not be solved in 2 years. They won't be solved in a campaign cycle or in a budget cycle. So I think it's important to be having conversations like the one we had today with Representative Moore-Green. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to give us a 5-star rating. And yeah, we'll see you back here next week.
Hey everyone, we're here. We're here with State Representative Raquel Moore-Green out of Salem. Raquel, how are you doing?
Very well, and thank you very much for having me, Reagan. You as well, Ben.
Thanks.
So Raquel, when I think about you, the most important thing, if I have to introduce someone to Raquel, the number one thing I think people need to know about you is that you've done tons of great stuff. Obviously, you're a legislator. You've been in the community. You've served all kinds of things. But the number one thing I tell people about you is you've been a legislative staffer and you've been a campaign staffer. Because when I've learned those about you, when I met you a few years ago, those things stuck out to me because it seemed like a lot of the way that you handle yourself now is because of those things. So walk us through a little bit about your history as a legislative and a campaign staffer. Like, who have you worked for? What did you do? That kind of stuff.
Well, thank you, Reagan, for the question and the opportunity to explain that particular facet of my background. And it's a little bit of a story, but I think it's worth telling. And I'll back up to even a little further back. So when we were living in Seattle, Washington, we lived there in the in the 80s. We lived there in the 80s. And I happened to stumble upon a job at Boeing through their BEG&F, which is their Boeing Employee Good Neighbor Fund program, and ended up staffing one of the executives, and that assignment was United Way of King County. So I became familiar with, that's where campaigning really first started for me. And for me, there's a beauty about campaigning. There's a start date and there's an end date. There's a goal, and you've got benchmarks along the way, right? So it's pretty well laid out. And fast forward to moving to Salem in the late 90s. Well, we moved here in the mid 90s, but in the late 90s, I took a part-time job with United Way of Mid-Willamette Valley, and I was a part-time campaign manager. We were still two of our three children were still in school. I did those mom hours, right? 10 to 2, or in the summertime, you get up real early and you go in and you're home before the kids have lunch, right? Something like that. And then fast forward to 2010, I was sitting at a lunch. It was a Salem Chamber business lunch, and I was sitting next to Kevin Cameron. And and he was then a representative in House District 19, South Salem, Turner, and Almsville are the current configuration. And we were chatting, and I said, I've been meaning to get a little bit more involved with politics. Our last one went to college, and so now I feel I have more time that, I'm not constricted anymore. And it's not a constriction. It was I loved raising my children, and it's the one job you can't do over again. I couldn't have, you just get to a point, you don't have any more kids. They're all gone. And that piece of life is over.
The payoff is now when you've got 13 grandkids. I saw in your bio.
That's true. Let's not go down that rabbit hole quite yet. Okay. Thanks, Ben. So then, I said, I'd love to volunteer for your campaign. And he said, hey, come on by, let's talk. And, you can meet you can meet the woman who's doing my volunteer recruitment and this, that, and the other. Oh, great. So I went and had a conversation with him, and we talked, maybe it was a good hour. It was a good solid hour. And I said, well, just let me know what you want, because I guess my strong suit in the volunteering over all the years, and this goes back to, having my first child, Mike, playing not baseball, t-ball, and being a t-ball mom and coordinator. And I work well. I seem to work well with people and coordinating things and getting things done, and really wanted to help them with volunteers. He calls me and he said, hey, I've been talking with my staff, and how about if you come and manage my campaign? I've never managed a political campaign. He said, oh, you can do it. It's 6 months. And I had another part-time job at that point, because had found something that I enjoyed doing, and it was a limited duration. It was about 12, 18 months. I was going to help out a local nonprofit here in town, and part-time, flexible, all of those things. And so I went and I talked with that employer and explained, the position. And certainly I didn't want to compromise anything because, oftentimes private employers really don't want to be associated with a particular campaign, right?
Right.
I get that. And, the woman I was working for said, well, I think you can manage that. I think, you've got a good balance. And so he said 6 months. That was in June. I would be done, in December. All done, right? He says, just 6 months part-time.
That's the number one lie in politics.
It is. It's never 6 months and it's never part-time.
No.
And that happened to be the year, to the listening audience, if you can go back that 12 years in Oregon politics, that the House became 30-30. There were 30 Democrats and 30 Republicans.
Yep.
And that was historic and monumental in so many ways. And I will inject at this point that the late Senator Jackie Winters said that the best session that happened in Oregon was that session. Mm-hmm. We had two speakers. It was the Honorable Arnie Roblin and the Honorable Bruce Hanna. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had two speakers. We had two leaders. Well, obviously the Republicans had their leader, but everything was divided and equal. The chairs of the committee, they were co-chairs. There was one Republican, one Democrat, and so anything that came through that committee, any bill that was going to be listened to, was vetted first through those chairs, right? Then Representative Cameron said to me, well, hey, why don't you come work for me in the HRO, the House Republican office? And I said, nah, I'm still trying to do this part-time thing, and I've got this other job. Still trying to do that balance of where we were empty nesters and thinking, wow, this is, going to be the time. I worked 2 days a week in the office. I job shared with another woman. And I had 2 days, she had 2 days. So I got the inside look of politics from the House Republican office. And then went on to continue to do his, what we called community outreach. He had a couple of us and I was community outreach and campaign, and he had a legislative staff. And we worked. It was wonderful, and so out of session, continued to do his outreach for him, his community engagement, all of his scheduling, all of those things that go in newsletters, all of that. And then we'd come back into session, and I work, part time I wasn't even part. I mean, I was part time, and I was in the office, and so I got an inside look to, how does this all work, right? How do bills come together, the negotiation, the working across the aisle, so on and so forth. And then in 2014, then Representative Cameron decided to run for commissioner. And so I managed that campaign for him and left the legislature, so to speak, right? And I had just a very small solopreneur business. I had various clients. I had some nonprofit. I picked up a couple of measures that I ran. And, that was a really interesting campaign to do. It was a stop the employee payroll tax here in Salem. And it was a local, right. Yeah, it was a local measure. And so it was just really interesting working on a single issue instead of a candidate, right? Mm-hmm. And all of the things that go into a candidate. I mean, it's a lot of the same components for campaign, but just it had a different feel, a different tone to it, So that was enjoyable. And then I picked up a couple of another commissioner who happened to be running and needed some help, and had the honor of helping then Commissioner Sam Brentano with his reelection in 2016. Ran a House race for candidate Laura Moret. She was running in House District 20. Mm-hmm. And picked up a DA a couple years later, continued to help then Commissioner Cameron with his campaigns until, then in 2018, I was asked to manage the late Senator Jackie Winter's campaign. And I by that point, I had a pretty full plate of small clients. Well, small in that, I had a job here and a little here and a little there, and it fits my personality well, and it really helped a lot of people out who wouldn't normally be able to have a quote consultant, help them out with their businesses. And you want me? Want me to run your campaign or help you manage your? Yes. So I signed on with her, and I helped manage that campaign with a couple of other campaigns. It was a very intense season for me that year. And
who was the Democratic nominee in that race? Do you remember?
It was
because that would have been a pretty competitive, I'm guessing, a lot of money spent on that race.
Was that okay, guys? We're going to have to go back and figure that out.
Yeah, I think
I'm pulling it up.
Reagan's looking right now.
Thank you, Reagan.
It was Deb Patterson in 2018.
It was,
yeah, that's what okay.
Yes, there was a woman by the name of Jackie who ran against Jackie and Jackie, and I think that must have been 14 then.
Okay, so 2018 was Deb Patterson.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, got it.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Reagan, for clarifying that.
Yeah.
And here again, just manage the campaign. I just need you from, I think I went on staff with her right after the primary. I might have been in the primary. I don't remember now. Just through November, you clean up in November, right? And the phone call comes in December. And it's from her chief of staff saying, well, the senator would like you to, come work for her in the Capitol. And I was really conflicted because here again, you don't want to, I hate to turn a client down, but at the same time, I had other clients and I can't compromise my other obligations. So they apparently they had a niche that they wanted me to be in, and it was constituent services. And that was something that I felt comfortable with, and something that I could also manage if I was not in the building. And that was kind of an important component. If you're on the policy side of things, you really need to be in that building. And it moves. And constituent services, not that they don't move, but it's got a different pace to it. It's got a different. I don't have to be in the building to do it, and so I carved that out, and I was in the building a couple of afternoons a week. And, one was to stay current with the staff and the tone of what was happening in the building. And then one afternoon, of course, we had our staff meeting, and we met with the senator, and we kind of went around the horn. We sat there, and she'd say, okay, so what do I need to know? What's happening? What do I need to know? And, Then she became ill, and at the point that she was no longer in the office, we stepped up hours of everybody to kind of help cover that void. And then she passed in May, and I spent a lot of time making sure that things were moving smoothly in the office. Her chief of staff, Pam McLean, is her daughter-in-law. And so it was not only a professional loss, but a very, very personal loss for Pam and for the family. And so that kind of then landed me in June of 2019, and the whole process of trying to find some replacements came about. So that's in a nutshell. Sorry.
So no, you're totally fine. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah. So then you become the person whose name and face is on the flyers, and so what I've been curious and wanted to ask you about was like a specific moment. Redistricting happens, right? You're relatively new to the elected side, but probably, I'm guessing, given by the fact that you're continuing to run, you're enjoying it, feeling like you have something to offer.
Yes.
Redistricting happens, and everything shifts dramatically, right? Like all the maps where there's all these maps, and who knew what was going to happen until it happens. And we've litigated redistricting plenty on this podcast, so we don't need to go there.
We don't need to go there.
But what I'm curious about is, like, there's a moment where the maps get adopted and you've got a series of choices. One is, I'm done. I don't want to do politics anymore. I'm going to go hang out with my grandkids. One is, I'm running for re-election in a seat that just got a lot harder to win in. And I think that was Clem, right? You and Clem were put in the same.
Yes, we were district in together, right?
Yeah. So, and he's not running, but it's a hard district. Or you could run for the Senate in what I think most people would describe as the most competitive, or certainly one of the 2 or 3 most competitive in the state. So you ultimately decide to run for the Senate. I'm curious, like, when you're in the moment before a decision has been made, what are you thinking about? Who are you talking to? What's going through your head when you're trying to evaluate basically what your life is going to look like for the next year?
Yeah, so I was appointed in July of 2019, and then elected in 2020. And in 2019, I had in my head the anticipation of running in 2020, because that was one of the questions that the commissioners asked. So are you just going to hold this seat to finish up the term, which was 18 months, or are you in this? Are you invested? And I said yes, I'm invested. So I will be running I will put my name out in 2020. And I had in my mind what my campaign was going to look like, right? I'd done this, at least, I think by that point, I'd run at least 8 or 9 campaigns, right? And then COVID happened, right? And that really shifted the landscape completely, and on many levels. And I actually think that it was the immersion into the constituent work that took place during COVID. If you remember, there were hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of people on unemployment.
Yeah.
Immediately. People trying to get health care. DMV, our whole way of life was just upended. And so we had these massive amounts of emails and calls that would come in. And then you coupled that with, we had daily briefings, and I don't know that the public realizes all that went into the demand that was made on the legislators, and a pure honor to serve. And here again, very fortunate that I'm in a position where my husband has been very supportive and extended a lot of grace to me to do this job. I mean, he just really has extended an immense amount of grace. And I think for me, kind of looking back, that constituent work, that community piece, because that's where I come from. I mean, I'm at the end of the day, we've invested ourselves in our community. And I love the community I live in, and I like helping resolve issues. It's like the child who comes to me with the puzzle. They can't get the puzzle to go together. Come on, Mom, you can help me do this, right? Yeah, let's do this together. Let's, but by the time I'm done with the child, my child now has those skills, right? I mean, that's really ultimately what I'm looking for, is that, what is that we can do to help people to get to where they need to be so that they can continue on and flourish, right? I mean, it's bringing, helping them come to a level where they feel that they have what they need to move forward. And so when redistricting came around, I think the blow for me was really that then Speaker Kotek changed the composition of the committee. Going in thinking that we've got a shot at this, right? We're going to come up with something that's reasonable for everybody in the state, not just my community. And so that was late September, so almost exactly a year ago. And that's when I did some real soul searching. Was that a year ago, guys, or was that 2 years ago?
It was a year, 1 year ago.
Wow,
it's crazy. It's been a year.
Yeah, it has been a year. So, some real soul searching, and first off, talk with my family. What are they willing to sacrifice, because it is a sacrifice for them.
Did you have conversations about, like, listen, if I do this, it's a very competitive seat, people are going to say things about me, there's going to be TV ads, like you might get dragged into it? Those conversations happen?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think they had already seen that through the 2020 election, and there were things about, said about me in 2020. And so you become prepared for that, you gird yourself for it. And, and I was talking with somebody earlier today about this exact thing, that, as a candidate, I know myself, and I'm grounded. I know who I am. I know where my value is. And I believe my family knows who I am, and they know where my value comes from as well. It's incredibly hurtful to them.
Yeah.
For me, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of like, you do what you need to do in order to get things done sometimes, right? And so I've
seen that a lot. I mean, I've worked with a lot of different candidates on their campaigns and not. And the number one thing you see is that the candidates usually don't take the hits as hard as the family does.
Yes.
The family actually takes it a lot harder, which I find super interesting, because that's not how you'd expect it to go. And certainly that's not always the case. Some candidates do take it harder than others, but I think you're right with that, where it's like you were already ready, you had been a staff, you knew it was coming, but the family members, even if they technically kind of see it on the outside, until it's you, they don't really get very, it doesn't bother them, right?
Well, the flip side too, this happened to me this cycle, where like I agree with you, Representative. Like, I can take the criticisms, and particularly when it's a criticism on like something I believe, or like something like I've done, I've said, I imagine that I voted for. I'd probably quibble about the context that's presented in or whatever, but there was a group that went onto my partner's social media page and took a picture of us that he had posted, and like I was like frustrated, but like the frustration was more about the fact, like, come after me, don't come after the person who literally has nothing to do with politics and did not put his name forward to be in the public space. He's just attached to someone. So I don't know if you, like, I imagine that like, when you've got family, especially if you've got a big family, like there's probably a lot of different perspective. Like, did any of your kids or grandkids or say like, I'm not sure if this is worth it, or did you have to talk through any of those challenges?
Well, my adult children, my daughters, I think are much more sensitive, being female. Not that my son isn't. Don't get me wrong, but I think they, I think they have greater reservations. So 2 of our 3 children were raised here in Salem. Mike is from my first marriage, and he was 7 when James and I married, and we lived in Redmond, Washington, and so he was raised there, and we moved here the summer that he went to college. So Mike never, this really wasn't his community, so to speak, you know, but it was definitely the girls' community. And so I think they probably see things a little bit differently too, because it's their community. And you know, they know people, right?
Their friends are seeing the
Mhm.
advertisements. Their teachers
Yeah.
from school
Yeah.
are hearing all
Sure.
the rumors. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. So
Right.
I think it's a little different for them. And my grandchildren who are here at the moment, are 3 of the 13 live here in Salem, and they're 7 months, 2 years, and 4 years old. And so I just have to tell this quick story, okay?
Sure.
So of course there's mail, right? There's mail that comes, and so my daughter was sorting through the mail, and she put one of my mailers down. She happens to live in district, and Benedict, the 2-year-old, he picks it up and he sees my picture and he says, "Grandma." So that was cute. You know, they're too young to understand any of the other stuff, you know. And grandma is who grandma is, you know, and they don't know anything different, you know, at this point. Yeah. But I don't remember where we were before that question. So
I think
That's
Reagan's
okay.
got one.
Okay.
So mine is, I want to give you a chance to talk about the issues that you're running on. And it's pretty simple question. Hopefully you've answered it before, but what are your top 2 issues that I guess they would be considered campaign issues, but stuff you specifically want to address if you go to the Senate, right? Voters choose you go to the Senate. Are there a couple main things that you really want to tackle in the 2023 session that you think are critical to Oregon and to your district?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, and on the doors, the issues are crime, homelessness, and inflation. I mean, this is what we hear over and over and over again. And I think it's a theme that is fairly statewide, and it's sad that we find ourselves in the chaos that we find ourselves in. I was speaking with a group this morning. There was a meet and greet, and I said to them, you know, I've lived here for 30 years, and I have never in my life seen individuals on the street the way that we do today. And Salem doesn't look like Portland, but we're not far from it, you know. It breaks my heart. I was stopped the other day at a corner just north of the Capitol, and here's a gentleman pacing back and forth, and he's got his head, you know, bent down and kind of in a quasi-fetal standing position, and he's muttering back and forth and pacing, and he doesn't have a shirt on, flip-flops, pair of shorts. And, you know, I'm not an expert, but from what law enforcement and our community health workers have said, you know, you see somebody like that and they're probably in the middle of a psychotic episode. I mean, that breaks my heart. You know, we have abandoned them as a state. You know, we did away with Damish, we did away with Fairview, the big we, okay, many years ago made the decision, well, we're going to have community mental health. And they, you know, they have failed to fund it, and they have failed on the leadership for it, in my estimation. And I think this is what we're seeing. You know, and along with that comes, you know, the decriminalization of hard drugs. And, you know, when 40 pills of fentanyl is legal to have on an individual, that is what is legal for me to carry. That's deadly. That's not a casual user's amount of fentanyl, you know. And so I guess what I want to talk about, these 2 issues. One has to do with behavioral and mental health, and righting the ship on the Oregon State Hospital, and righting the ship on the services that we have, and having the big conversation that you know, nobody should be put away forever for mental illness. I think we've all, you know, we've come so far in our culture to understand that that's not what we do. You know, we help to restore as much as possible. But you know what? There are some individuals who perhaps will always need assistance more than. I mean, it's the same. And one of the analogies shared with me earlier this summer is, you know, if I have a grandparent or a parent who is suffering from Alzheimer's, you know, we have the discussion with the doctor, and we see to it that they are taken care of properly. Why aren't we doing this, you know, for the individuals who can't take care of themselves? So that's one area that I would. Yes.
I am really glad you're talking about this. I've been spending time thinking and trying to develop my own thoughts about this. So given the narrative that you've described, which I think is right? We had these state institutions. We decided that those were not the right answer. So we basically defunded these based on the promise that we're going to invest in community opportunities, community options for mental health. That never gets built. That combined with the fact now that like it's impossible to staff many of these places because the workforce challenges are. In fact, I think, were you at the CCO conference?
Yeah, I got to speak.
I was going to say, I thought I heard you speak there. So this was big topic of conversation at the CCO conference. Do you have any thoughts on like what we do with that? Like, is it expand capacity of the state institutions in the short term? Is it build workforce pipelines? And like, what can we actually do to remedy a really acute problem that's happening like right now?
Yeah, well, first off, it's just going to take time. Okay, so let's say we come to an agreement on what the solution is, just to build facilities, just to get people into staff. Okay, so we know that we've got it's going to take a little bit. I mean, if I could just make a footnote, so Salem Hospital just built a new wing, 150 beds. But it's there, but there's no staff, and they're not secure residential. I mean, this is just healthcare, you know, folks who need to be in the hospital. And that's just a footnote. So even in communities where there perhaps is a place for them, we don't have the workforce yet. So that's another a long conversation there. But I think, Ben, the really important thing for me as a leader is to lead on the conversation of how are we going to do this. We know that we don't want you know, facilities like Damish and Fairview. We know that delivering services in the community is much more challenging and difficult than what they thought it would be 20, 25 years ago. It really is. It's much more difficult than what we had thought. And so how are we going to do this? You know, we don't want to take away an individual's rights, but at the same time, the mom walking her kids down the street with the stroller with somebody in a psychotic episode, that's not, it's not fair to either party, right? And so how do we want to do that? Now, if I could just hold that for a second, let's talk about capacity, bed capacity. You know, I so remember being in committee, in behavioral health committee, and we were having, I don't remember if it was an informational part of our agenda or if there was a bill that we were discussing, but I queried capacity and beds. And the response I received was, we can't build our way out of this with beds. And I stopped. I said, no. I understand that. I mean, that doesn't do anything for anybody, right? But my point, and I went on to make, is our population has grown over the last 10 years. We've gained 1 million people. Okay, not only have we gained 1 million people, but we've legalized some drugs along the way that have compromised the health of some of these individuals, right? So you just do this simple math. You know, if we had 10% you know, with 30, and I have no idea what percentage, you know, why is going to grow just because the population grew. And so in a simplistic way, I would say, of course, we need more secure residential treatment area facilities, and I think we're seeing this come true. And so how do we go about doing that? And how do we ease some of the restrictions and some of the processes? I mean, I have talked to companies, representatives of companies that have attempted to open beds. OHA does not make it easy.
Yeah.
They, we had 100 beds up in Wilsonville that they were ready to go on. And I don't know if you remember this, Ben, I think Reagan may, but they go in, they get all of their paperwork pulled in, and I don't remember all of the going back and forth and the negotiations back and forth. It had been 5 years to get to that point. And, they come back, well, you need this, 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 and this. And, the company's penciling out, and it's not going to pencil out.
So that's really helpful and interesting insight. And it does seem to me that our government, I can't remember which, you mentioned inflation, crime, and
homelessness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think of it as maybe different a little bit, but similar. Homelessness, housing, and behavioral health, and like all different versions of what I would describe as crises. And it does feel to me like state government doesn't have the tools or the structure or the function to like rapidly move towards addressing them, because there's so many like safeguards and checks and balances. And I think coming from a good place, right? Trying to minimize waste, fraud, abuse, trying to minimize legal liability, but like it's prevented us from being able to like move quickly as these crises have ratcheted up super quickly. We're spending 5 years reviewing paperwork,
Yeah.
By design. Right.
And I think when we stop and the way you laid out what perhaps you're hearing on the doors.
Yeah.
The world that of problem solving that I've spent the better part of my adult career in has been multifaceted, right? I mean, the homeless issue is multifaceted, but the structure we have in the legislature to address the issue is not multifaceted. There's the housing committee. There's the behavioral health committee.
Yes.
There's this. And, that's where I would come in and say, hey, let's all come together and let's have a planning session. Let's talk about it. And, I'm a big visual, a whiteboard or whatever the case might be. Let's throw those ideas up there, and let's make sure that when we're talking about housing and we're talking about homelessness, that we understand the different dynamics that are going into it, and that's not done in a silo. Because when we're talking about reducing rules and regulations for building, that's across the board. That shouldn't just be in one area, right? And what are the levels? I mean, I think there's going to be a report, or maybe it just came out, of the number of housing that we need. Well, I'll be interested to see the report, because is it actually parceled up so that I can say, oh, well, we need so much low entry, low barrier for homeless, and we need so much secure residential treatment, because in essence, that's housing for them, right? I mean, that is their housing until they can move on, right? Because that is the goal, is to get them back into the community, to restore them so that they can be part of the community.
I'll build off I had Governor Kitzhaber spoke at my campaign kickoff, and he basically said exactly what you said, which is like the legislature is structurally designed to isolate policy issues separate from each other. And the other thing he added to it, which I thought was really interesting, is none of these problems can be solved in a 2-year election cycle or budget cycle.
None.
They have to be long-term. So you have to be able to maintain an investment strategy. You have to be able to maintain a workforce strategy, a policy strategy, despite political winds blowing, despite leadership turnovers. And like those two things together, the like isolation of policy and the long-term nature, make it really hard to solve. And like, that's why Kitzhaber's vision, I think, and we should have him on to talk about this, is like, you need to build a big table of people who all are bought in towards the vision.
Absolutely, Ben.
Push.
Yeah. I think about one of the projects that I worked here in Salem on, here's a group that wants to do a capital campaign, right? And so we sit down and we start to strategize, right? Okay, so who are your new neighbors going to be? Who are the people that can make investments? And you start to build that table, and pretty soon you have this organization, you have this special interest group, you have this municipality and that municipality, and it is building a big table, and it is sitting down and coming up with that vision of what are things going to look like. And, then ultimately, in this particular case, you hand the reins back over to that entity that has then accomplished their goal and will continue to carry out their mission, right? And so to the degree that government is essentially the same thing, right? You have an issue, that's your table, and then who are all the players that need to be talking, and then where's the leadership to say, okay, this is what's in place and what will move forward. And I think, Ben, if I could just now inject the fact, or not the fact, but one of the statements that I have made over and over again is I'm a big fan of saying homelessness, money, local community, county, city. Here you go. These are these are your metrics. You need to, but please resolve the issue the way your community wants to resolve it. Okay, and because we saw that with cahoots. I don't know if you followed that. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So here's this terrific program in Eugene that has been incredibly effective. It was a what I would call a grassroots, right? That it started out, and over the years it has grown. It has gotten its structure. It has come to address the homeless issue, where homelessness and law enforcement intersect, right? Yep. And mental health, where those three intersections are made. And they've got a model that works. Well, in comes a bill in the 21 session saying, oh, hey, if you do a cahoots model, we're going to put $10 million aside and you do a cahoots model. Well, you just can't walk into a community and say, here's the model, execute it, especially when it's not a recipe like baking bread, where you need so much flour, you need so much yeast, you need so much warm water, and you will have a loaf of bread. That's not, communities are not that way. And I had some very good conversations with the folks who brought that concept to me. And I said, I think that's great, but I don't think it should have to be the cahoots model. It should be, that's the vision. These are the outcomes we want. And here's a model. And if you think it will work for your community, then get connected with those folks and figure out how it worked there. But here's the money to do it.
It almost sounds like the CCO model you're describing, right? Like, here's a global budget, go and make investments upstream that are going to produce good outcomes. You have quality metrics.
Right.
Well, because every community has different assets, right? You can't assume that every community is going to be built. Like, maybe cahoots works if you do it in another community that has all the same stuff Eugene does, but so many different communities are built different ways, and some of them have really great this, but they have a lot of deficiency here. And so it's like, if you just tell them to go do this, they may not be able to build it because there just might be this part that their community can't replicate, and so it falls apart.
Yeah.
Representative, I want to ask you one additional follow-up to a comment
you made earlier, please.
And then we'll go to Reagan, probably to close, depending on time. One thing I'm super dissatisfied with right now in Oregon politics is the conversation around Measure 110, because it seems like there's like a group of people who are like, repeal Measure 110, it caused all these problems. And then there's these other people who are like, Measure 110 was great and voters strongly support it. And it seems to me, I don't think Measure 110 is going to be repealed. I think the margin was pretty big. The polling that I've seen is pretty strong. And I think the voters thought they were voting on like two simple things. Should addiction be a criminal justice issue or a public health issue? And they said public health. And should we spend more money on treatment? And they said yes. That's what I think most voters thought they were voting for. But as we all know, the framework beneath it is actually really complicated.
Yes.
And so my specific question for you, and I don't know, you've probably spent some time thinking about this too, is I have a friend who describes like the problem with Measure 110 is the criminal justice system was a bridge to treatment. It might not have been the right bridge, but for some people, it was a bridge to treatment. We took away that bridge and we haven't sufficiently built additional bridges to connect folks. Do you have any thoughts on like what those bridges could look like?
I just can't thank you enough for that question, Ben, because I have given a lot of thought to this. So the Measure 110 was put into statute with Senate Bill 744, and what is sitting on the behavioral health side of the fence and on the others in the other chamber. I was scrambling to figure out, so where's Measure 110? Who's doing what with 110? Because I'm looking at it from the behavioral health, aspect. And so I got connected with the work group on the Senate side and was able to listen in on a lot of the discussion that went on. I provided some input on it, and so now we have statute that we've looked at for 2 years now, right? It's been in effect, and this is what I would propose, Ben. I believe that the people of Oregon said we need to treat substance abuse, period, full stop. And we want to fund that through marijuana tax money. And I think we need to hang on to that piece, okay? And around the legalization of the drugs that are causing so much of the problems that we're seeing, unfortunately. That what we need to do there is we need to say, okay, we all know that we need to do a little bit more here. So, and track with me on this. Are you familiar with community corrections? So that when an individual comes out of jail, they have a parole and probation officer, right? They have a program set up for them. There are services available to them. Oftentimes, at least in Marion County, those services begin 6 months before the adults in custody, AICs, are released. And do you have a driver's license? Do you, or a birth certificate? All of those things that perhaps because of your length of stay and for the reasons that you're there, you don't have. So that when they come out, they've got some footing. Sometimes they've already got housing set up for them. But there's an accountability piece. There's a parole officer, right? Okay. Now, so just take that model for a second and hang on to it. So what if we could say, an officer has, pulled somebody over for whatever reason, has found that they're holding, right? And say, you know what? We're not taking you to jail. Our model is now going to be, we're going to turn you over to community health, community mental health, community substance recovery, whatever we want to call it. And we're going to say, you need, not, and I'm not quite sure, how this would work out because it's, in the brain, right? Just an idea. And get them over to services where they can actually sit down and maybe they're high, maybe they really are caught in their addiction. Let's give them a timeout. And the burns have that ability to do that. Some of the infrastructure that's being funded with the marijuana tax money are the burns, places where folks can go and if they're having an episode, they can sit quietly. I think Ben has got some great resources around that over in Deschutes County. Take them there and, let them have that moment, let them in, and not a jail setting, okay? But a setting where, maybe their loved ones can come and say, hey, is it time to do intervention? Is it time to get you into treatment? And have that real serious conversation with those individuals. And then let's say they elect not to take treatment. Okay, well, maybe then there's follow-up that's done. I don't know, Ben, but I think there has to be a better way to do this. And so when you talk about repealing Measure 110, my big in the sky would be turn it back. You know, in order to do something different, the Constitution needs to be changed. And that's the tricky part. So how do we send that back to the voters? And I would almost hope that it could be a referral from the legislature to say, how do we keep the piece that we know is working and that we want to continue to work? I mean, it's much like Mike from Oregon Recovery said, you know, we got to build those services before we open the floodgates, right? And we opened those floodgates and we didn't have services ready. And so, and on that criminality piece, what, you know, we say, okay, how now are we going to address that? And I'm not an attorney, truth be told. So I don't even know how to go about doing that statutorily. You know, and maybe it can be done within the confines of law that's already on the books. I don't know that.
Well, I really like that first half of what you're describing, because like one of the things I asked at my kickoff I had an audience there, and I asked people to raise their hand if someone they love has been impacted by addiction or behavioral health issues. And as you can imagine, everybody, like room of 100 people, like everybody's hand is up. And so my personal experience with this, with someone that I love in my family, direct family, if the only way he's going to get access to treatment is if a person who's in crisis, who's struggling with addiction, makes the decision on his own, it will not happen. And so that's what I think, that's the bridge that we have to, like, if we can't just rely on someone who's going through a medical, like they're navigating a medical crisis. They're not always thinking in terms of what's best for them. And so, yeah, I think what you were describing is some iteration of that seems like a system that
you know, and you know, and here again, Ben, you know, loved ones lost to suicide, loved ones with mental illness. I mean, you know, diagnosed mental illness, loved ones with other addictions. I mean, you're absolutely right that, you know, we can talk from the heart about the ones that we still have and the ones that we've lost, right? But having that time out, you know, and you're right, maybe they aren't at the point where they're ready, but if you have something where you can follow back up, you know, a warm wrap around of some sort, I don't know. I mean, you know, I'm an optimist. I mean, the glass is half full. You know, give me lemonade, give me lemons, and I'm going to make lemonade. You know, you know, we have to go through life. I mean, and you know, it's not easy, and it's obviously highly emotional because it's people, and we have emotions, and we, you know, can be things are emotional, even you know, in the best of days, right? So that kind of takes me back to that big table. You know, who are all the partners that need to come together to talk about this, and who's going to be the leader on that? And I'm raising my hand saying, I want to lead that. I think, you know, that's important work. You know, at the end of the day, it's helping somebody who needs help, and we know has value by the pure fact that they're a human being.
Thank you, Rep. Moore-Green. That was fantastic. We've really enjoyed having you. I know Ben's got to get going. Where can people find out about your campaign?
Well, I have a website, but I also have an email and I have a phone number. I do respond to email. It takes me a little bit longer, usually not within 24 hours, but I try to get it done. Phone calls, I usually try to get back within a day. My website is www.rmgsd10 .com. So Raquel Moore-Green, Senate District 10, all kind of .com. And my email address is my first name, Raquel, Raquel. Yes, it is Spanish. Yes, my mother was Puerto Rican, and my middle name is Consuelo. So go figure.
That's awesome.
And my first name at rmgsd10.com. And my phone number, 503-362-5021.
Very brave.
All right.
And the phone number out there.
we'll trust our listeners to be good and use that appropriately and well. So thank you so much, and we've enjoyed having you.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's wonderful to see you again, even if it was the ag tour, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Thanks, Representative.
Okay. Thank you so much, both. Thanks.